workplace and somebody's really stressed, and you say, boy, I can see you're really stressed. Is there any way I can support you? No, I'm fine, right? Years ago, I was working with cancer patients, and a cancer patient once told me to never believe people when they say they're fine. Fine means freaked out, insecure, having a neurotic episode to most people. You know, it's sort of social niceties. Oh, I'm fine. But it often isn't the truth. So tonight we're going to talk about understanding the anxious brain and anxiety, because it's a really important topic because it's an epidemic in our culture. Thoreau was a pretty wise man, and I'm going to sit and stand off and on throughout the evening because I have a bad knee that I'm nursing, and rather than having to limp out of here or have somebody get me a wheelchair at the end of the night, if I stand for 2 hours, I'll be in trouble. I'm going to sit, but they got me a stool, so I'm still pretty high for you. So Thoreau said, direct your eye inward and you'll find 1,000 regions yet undiscovered. Travel them and become an expert in home cosmography. And home cosmography is map making. So he's telling us to turn inward and that there's so much we don't understand and know about ourselves. There's so much richness inside, including understanding how the brain works. And it's essential to really understand anxiety, to understand how marvelously we're made, you know, as it's said in the Bible, in Psalms. So I already said that we're hardwired for survival, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that works. And that survival gear literally gets built through neural pathways as the brain develops in infancy. When you hold a brand new baby, what happens if they get startled? What do? They jump and they kind of reach for the air. A relaxed baby is soft and pliable and tends to automatically breathe all the way down to the bottom of their bellies. Infants are belly breathers, and slowly as time goes on, they, like most of us, tend to breathe much more shallow. And we're going to talk about why the breath is so important in a little bit. But what happens with the stress response system is it's one of a handful of neural systems in the brain that if it's poorly regulated or abnormal in any way, it causes dysfunction in all the rest of the brain. So by the end of tonight, you'll understand how that works. Just a little bit more about me. I've worked for Prairie Care now going on 9 years, and I originally was hired to help an adult outpatient program. And I did that, and I loved that, and I brought a lot of what I teach into that program. And then eventually I went to the founder and president of Prairie Care and said, I love what I'm doing, but the program's growing. I can hand it over to other people, and I've got some ideas for a new role for myself. And he said, let's hear it. So I told him, and he says, I love it. Let's do it. Will you write yourself a job description? So now all I do is education out in the community, like I'm doing tonight, as well as in-house education. And in part, where I got those skills is for about 20 years now, I've been working through a Washington, D.C. based organization called the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. And that work has taken me all around the world. So I've been in Gaza. I've worked with, done joint trainings with Israelis and Palestinians together. I've been to Turkey. I was to Haiti 5 times after the earthquake down there. We worked with Hurricane Katrina victims after Hurricane Katrina in the Gulf Coast. We have some people now, some of our team are working in Jordan at this particular point in history. So the center does work, both trains people, these kind of principles, and outstanding group process principles. So people can really begin to turn their stress around and be in the driver's seat of their own life. And we have watched entire communities not able to sleep for weeks on end after a major disaster, and we work with them for a day and suddenly they're able to sleep. And we teach them some of the same principles I'm going to be teaching you tonight. Also, I always try to be really authentic and honest. I myself was taken away from my mom when I was 13, and this was pre-child protection years before anybody took, so that's really dating me, before they took anybody away. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I'd been in 7 placements because they didn't have regulated foster care. And so the people who took me, it was because they wanted a babysitter, or they wanted a farm worker, or this or that, and so it goes. And I was one of the most anxious kids on the planet at that point in my life. And I always, when I start talking, say I failed sophomore speech twice, which is true. And if you had asked me 30 years ago if I would, spend my days, day in and day out, giving public talks, I'd tell you, yeah, I'm going to fly too. But I have to tell you, some of what I'm going to share with you today can change your life. And so I feel like I'm a poster child for that and a poster child for resilience. All right, so let's dive in. So the Mind-Body Connection and the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, which is the organization out of DC I work with, and there's some incredible videos, some research on the center's website, and I think at the very last slide, I think I remembered to put their website on there. But there's some free exercises, some free stress reduction strategies and exercises on the website. But Dr. James Gordon, who founded the center, he was a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, and he wanted to do things differently. And he felt that prevention was worth a lot, and that oftentimes if people knew about themselves and knew about how we're made, they're less likely then to need to see a psychiatrist and need psychiatric medications, et cetera. And he was very interested in trauma and helping with trauma relief globally. So the mind-body connection, what we know is that the mind is constantly communicating with the body and the body is communicating with the mind. That's ongoing. And that and the body sends messages to the brain and vice versa. We also now know that the heart is actually a better memory system than the brain, and the heart is sending messages, more messages to the brain than the brain sends to the heart and the rest of the body. We didn't know that until recently. And those messages in turn are sent through every system in our body as well as through the powerful vagus nerve. And let's see if I can show you this. The vagus nerve is this, it's called the wandering nerve, and it literally goes from the base of our spine and has minor nerves that go off of it and reach out and send information to our abdomen, to our lungs, to our heart, all the way up to the brain stem, where the oldest part of our brain is, which is called the reptilian brain. And it's made up of the amygdala, which we'll learn a little bit more about in a few minutes, and the limbic system, which is responsible for strong emotions. Well, the vagus nerve is always scanning the body. And it's called the superhighway of information, as well as the wandering nerve, because it's the part of our brain almost like a fire alarm system in the fire that's sort of scanning the house for smoke. So it reads our body and is sending a message to the brain to turn on fight flight. And one of the ways it does that is by how shallow or deep we're breathing. Most of us tend to get about 1/4 of the oxygen we need. And most of us are walking around with stale carbon dioxide. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes as well, but that's the vagus nerve. Stress is the #1 health concern reported on surveys, and more than 85% of adults are taken to the doctor regularly and report stress. And a recent study that was just done last year by the National Institute of Health revealed that over 200 million people in the United States are diagnosed with anxiety disorders a year. 200 million a year. Something's wrong. We also know that untreated stress and anxiety affects every area of our life, and that children are taken to the doctor for stress-related stomach aches and headaches more than they are to the flu. Do any of you work with young children? Have you noticed that they often get stomach aches when it has nothing to do with their Pardon me?
Monday stomach aches.
Monday stomach aches, yes. Are you a teacher? Yes, Monday stomach aches, absolutely. So one of the things that the research has shown us, it's not just an external event. We have a lot of external events in our life that could trigger the stress response. It's our perception of that external event. A perceived threat is what turns on our system, our survival system. So a perceived threat or stress automatically engages our emergency hotline, and then literally sends the emergency center response to the amygdala, which is down here, this yellow part of the brain. It's like turning on the fire alarm in our body. And once activated, that amygdala sends the equivalent of all points bulletin out to every other system in our body. And that rapid response alarm sends survival energy. That's why we have such a huge influx of adrenaline when we're really stressed. And it activates what's called the sympathetic part of the nervous system, which I'll show you in just a minute. And that's automatic. Our sympathetic nervous system is automatic. It's part of the autonomic nervous system. And what we now know from lots of research is that it's not only autonomic, but we can control it consciously. And we didn't know that before there were so many studies done on the mind-body connection. So the sympathetic part of the nervous system, the way I like to think of that, it's like stepping on the gas in these vehicles that we walk around in every day. And we have all these symptoms. So our heart rate speeds up, our blood pressure and our breathing speed up, and our breathing tends to become shallow, and our digestion slows down or stops. We always have a little peristalsis in our intestine grinding up our last meal, and we have digestive enzymes that's helping in that process. That literally stops. And with chronic stress or chronic anxiety, it leads to problems with digestion. And we're also seeing an epidemic of all kinds of digestive disorders. So that literally stops. And the reason it stops is the body's job is to be efficient in case we're really in danger. So it frees up every system to just be in fight or flight. The other system that's impacted is, how many of you have ever been really stressed and you notice your hands get cold? That's another system. And what's happening is our blood flows away from our extremities. It pools around our organs in order to protect them. And so because this is a system that we've had since the beginning of mankind, if we were to get bit or clawed by a saber-toothed tiger, say, we're less likely to bleed to death because we don't have any blood flow in our extremities. It's all pooled around our major organs. So every one of these symptoms we have is in service of our survival. The problem is we tend to get into the habit of overriding these symptoms, or we're just not aware of them. We're not paying attention. The other thing that happens is our pupils dilate. And that's so that if there's a threat in the middle of the night, we're more likely to be able to see better in the dark, and temporarily our hearing gets more acute. And we tend to have strong emotional responses and a lot of alarm-based thinking. Is there anybody in here ever been stressed and you just can't sleep? Your mind just keeps going round and around and around? Raise your hand. Everybody in the room. Well, I'll tell you about a time that happened to me. I was living in D.C. for a while. I left the Twin Cities about 18 years ago, and I was working full-time at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine as the associate director. And it was shortly after 9/11, so I'm not quite sure how many years that was ago now. Time flies. But then after 9/11, we were working with firefighters from upstate New York, and we were working with first responders in the DC area, and we really as a team practiced what we teach. So I was pretty calm through all that. And then we had sniper attacks at a nearby mall. Do you remember that? It was on the news. And one night I went to bed, and I woke up because this really loud noise in my bedroom and this bright light, and my bed was literally this close to the window. And I sat up startled, and there was a helicopter searching my bedroom. Only in DC, what can I say? And so they're searching the bedroom, and they're very serious. And I could have taken a picture of the guys. I could tell you exactly what they looked like. That's how close they were. So because I'd heard the news earlier in the day about the sniper attack, they searched my house about 3 or 4 times. They went up and down the block. They searched the alley in back of the house, the woods in back of the alley. And I'm just sort of sitting there temporarily frozen. And my mind has now been activated. And guess what the alarm-based thinking is saying? What if the sniper's in the house? What if they were hiding in my closet? What if they're hiding in the bushes and I go back to sleep and they get in the house? What if they climbed in a basement window? Well, I got to tell you, you can kill yourself with what ifing. And as a young person, I think I bought land in What Ifville because I hung out there so much, but I gave that stake of land up a long time ago. So what I did is I pulled myself together and I went downstairs and I searched the whole house. And then I got a little neurotic. I started pulling everything out of the broom closet. Well, you'd have to be like an infant to hide in the broom closet. But I'm still not sort of consciously with it yet. Then I get a flashlight out of the kitchen drawer and I want to search the bushes in front of the house, thinking somebody could be hiding there. The bushes were literally this short and this close to the house. And then I said, okay, Laura, get a grip. So I went back upstairs and I knew that I had a choice because I know the science well. If I stayed with the what-ifing all night, I would not get back to sleep. Even if I could turn my brain off, unless I used a skill to reactivate parasympathetic response, I was literally not going to be able to sleep all night because of all that influx of adrenaline and hormones that we're flooded with when we're stressed, and particularly when we're woken in such a jarring way. So the parasympathetic part of the nervous system, it does the opposite of sympathetic. So our breathing and our heartbeat are regular. Our breathing returns to normal if we've been stressed. When we reactivate this part, our muscles are relaxed, our digestion is activated, et cetera, et cetera. So we have all of these symptoms when we're in parasympathetic response, which is like stepping on the brakes. So I did a couple of exercises, and then because the mind gets so busy, it reminds me of those gerbils or a rat in a wheel that's going round and around and around, na 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 na. And it doesn't do any good to say stop it because the brain is designed to think. We have to give it something else to do. So there's a series of phrases, and it's called autogenics, and you can actually find it online, and it's been probably one of the most researched skills that there is. And it literally starts with a series of phrases like, my shoulders are soft and relaxed. I am at peace. And then that repeats it about 5 or 6 times. I went through those phrases. I got probably through about 6 of them, and I was sound asleep. Woke up the next morning, and I thought, was there really a helicopter in front of my window, or was I dreaming it? The morning paper said that they had been searching neighborhoods, and then including the neighborhood I was in, for the snipers. The sniper in my brain was almost more dangerous than the sniper they were looking for outside at that point. And most of us don't even realize that we literally have the power to get back in the driver's seat of our life, to reactivate parasympathetic response, which goes dormant. It gets out of the way. So if we really have to fight or flee, it's out of the way. And what Mind Body Skills teach us is that we can reactivate biochemical stability by stepping on the brakes, by using a skill. Any questions about that? A number of years ago, I did a project with inner city teachers, probably about 15 years ago. And the organization that asked me to do it said, does this work with preschoolers? And at that point, no one had worked with preschoolers with this stuff yet. And I said, I don't know. And she said, if I get a grant, would you be willing to write a program and do it? And I said, sure. Well, these little buggers got it just like that. One day, I had just gotten them totally relaxed, and the fire alarm went off. So we had to trek outside the building. And this was a very stressed classroom. Most of these children went home to a homeless shelter at night, and the aides and the teachers were stressed. So we're outside, we come back in. Now they're totally dysregulated, because they got jarred awake. They were almost asleep from some imagery I had done. So we come back inside, a couple kids are punching each other, and they're talking, and I had created something called the quieting down song, and they're not paying attention to me, they're just blowing me off. But I learned early on that they would respond to puppets. And so my colleague and I that were doing the program, we taught ourselves to be puppet literate. And so we had the bag of puppets sitting there, and I just started talking to the bag of puppets. And the mouse puppet, who was one of the kids' favorite puppets, head was sticking out of the bag. I said, Mousy, I'm so sorry I left you inside. It must have been so scary in here with that loud noise. Will you come out and let the children help you calm down? Yeah, we'll help her, we'll help her. They immediately gathered around me. They're going, shh, shh. And Mousy says, they have to sit down and be quiet. So they're helping each other sit down. They sit down. The mouse puppet comes out of the bag. Imagine a mouse puppet. And Mousy says, I was so scared and I was really, really mad at you, Miss Lora, for leaving me inside by myself. And this 3-year-old says, good using your words, Mousy. And then another child says, Mousy, just breathe. And Mousy says, I can't remember how to do it right. And this little 3-year-old led the mouse puppet as well as his peers into something that we call soft belly or diaphragmatic breathing that we'll do a little bit later tonight. Everybody started to calm down. Another little boy says, do you feel better now, Mousy? And I'm thinking, I'm getting a lot of mileage out of this and I'm going to keep them going. And Mousy says, not quite yet. And this little guy says, Mousy, your arms are getting heavy and warm. You're at peace. And literally went through the autogenics phrases. And with little children, I called it autogenie. I told them it was like getting on a magic carpet and having a genie take you from here to there. So it was amazing to me, and I think that's our birthright. I think that should be taught. Those kind of skills should be taught, as well as emotional intelligence, in every preschool program across the country. And if I had my way and ruled the world, we would. And at Prairie Care, we work both with adults as well as children. We have an inpatient mental health unit. Not only do the children learn these kind of skills when they go into either the outpatient programs or the inpatient programs, our adults learn them. And in between shift changes, the nurses do diaphragmatic breathing after a shift and before the next one, because they find that it clears their mind and they go into that next shift in a much better place. And when they leave the shift to go home, they're not taking their patients home with them. So now you know about the gas and the brakes. The fight-flight response impacts every organ in our body. So these are those same symptoms I was talking about, but it's just pointing to the organs that they're literally impacting. Did you know when we're really stressed, our saliva flow decreases? I already talked about our pupils dilating. And because of the peristalsis slowing down and stopping in our abdomen, we literally end up with all kinds of problems with bowel movements, with constipation. And our blood vessels get more constricted. They increase as major vessels dilate. We now know that every single health concern we have, there is a relationship to stress. And that people, whether we're talking about people with Alzheimer's or people with cancer, they do much better throughout their treatment when they're taught stress reduction strategies, along with whatever conventional care they're getting. We also know that we're having an epidemic with Alzheimer's and dementia, and the University of Arizona did a study a number of years ago, and I think they have an ongoing study now. And what they looked at is they looked at early diagnosed Alzheimer's patients. They put them in 8 weeks of mind-body skills groups as well as changed their diets, and they found that they began to get some of their memory back, and it halted the progression of the disease. Now I want you to think with me for a moment to that generation. So we're talking about people over 80. What was going on when they were children? The Depression and World War II. And of course, we didn't know about the mind-body connection then, and we didn't know that talking about our emotions was healthy and a good thing to do. It was survival. So many of those people in that generation grew up anxious throughout their entire lives, not having a clue they could do anything about it. And slowly over time, guess what happens when cortisol is running through our body all the time when we're constantly chronically stressed? It not only eats away tissue in our digestive system, it eats away brain cells. But we know now that that can be turned around. So the body is flooded with over 1,400 physical and chemical reactions and over 30 different hormones. And the reason the literature is precise and says over is because they haven't named what the others do yet. They know there are more chemicals, but there are more reactions and more hormones, but they don't know exactly what they do. So they say they know what those 30 do, those 1,400, but they haven't pinpointed precisely what the others do. And those hormones and neurotransmitters are released by the body's stress response system. That's a lot. I mean, just think about that. That's a lot. They remain high hours and even days after the stressful event if they're not actively discharged. So that night, when the helicopter was in front of my bedroom window, and I used the progressive relaxation phrases to get myself back to sleep, I woke up completely refreshed. I slept through the rest of the night, even after getting jolted awake like that in the middle of the night, because I found the brakes by activating parasympathetic response. So I literally was activating the parasympathetic part of my brain, which then takes us back into biochemical stability and begins to cancel out some of the stress hormones. Any questions? We're doing good. And I'm going to make sure we have questions at the end, too. Everybody okay? Okay. All right. So I talked about the amygdala briefly. I used that word. But the amygdala, that's the part that's the reptilian brain that's that literally is responsible for the stress response. And then the limbic system, so the amygdala is this part down here, and then this is the limbic system, which is responsible for strong emotions. So another way to look at this is that when we're stressed, when the stress response is activated, we often refer to that as amygdala hijacking. So the amygdala literally hijacks the rest of the brain. It says, move over, I'm in charge now. And so you have difficulty activating information or forms of communication from this part of your brain. Have you ever had an argument with someone and you stutter over your words and what you really want to say won't come to you? Well, that's because the amygdala is in charge. And when we're trying to have a conversation from an amygdala hijack, it's a very different conversation than when we can be measured and reasonable and conciliatory and stop and listen to the other person's perspective. But when we're in amygdala hijack, we're not capable of doing that. And I have to tell you, I've saved more marriages by teaching people about this. So in a few minutes, we're going to talk about the difference between fight and flight and how that applies here. Threatening stimulus always gets first priority. Always. But there's something we can do about that, as I said. This was my cat, Honey, who's gone to kitty heaven now. But I had this picture from years ago. I had just gotten him from a friend's litter. I guess, is it a litter if it's a cat? A litter. Yeah, I thought so, but I'm so used to thinking of litters as dogs. So from my friend's litter, and I brought him home, and I put him down I just put him down on the floor, and he saw the monster in the mirror. Now, if you look at him, see how his pupils are dilated? You can see it in the glass, and how his hair is standing on edge? That's called the pilar-erector response, to get specific. And that's what happened to me that night that the helicopter was in front of my bedroom. The hair on the back of my neck literally stood on end. And so when we're really startled, that's what's most likely to happen. So he was startled by that monster. He literally paced back and forth in front of the mirror for about an hour, and at one point I tried to pick him up and the little claws came out. He hissed at me and jumped out of my hands, and I thought, whoa. and then he went under the bed because he was trying to move into that place of what we call rest and restore. That has to come after the stress response. And with people with chronic stress, it doesn't. So the fight-flight response is designed for our survival. It's designed to work in short, infrequent bursts. There's harmful effects. They're minimal in the short, infrequent amount. When this persists and becomes chronic worry or chronic avoidance, which is easily triggered in an ongoing way, it ends up being anxiety. So I'm going to give you some more examples of that. It's normal to be stressed. It's normal for the stress response to work. And if anyone in here says yours doesn't, it means you're either really, really good at working with yourself, or you have a difficult time telling the truth, like that little third grader, because it's our survival gear. That's a good thing. I love this picture. I think it's stress. And I think that's exactly what happens to us. We lose our stripes. You know, we don't feel on top of our game when we're stressed. We also know that worry becomes toxic. It builds up. All those stress chemicals with ongoing worry builds up in us. And we know it's probably one of the most harmful things we can do. And one of the reasons so many people suffer from anxiety disorders or from anxiety is because they don't know how to turn off the worry channel in their brain. They don't even know that that's an option. This is the difference between fear because there's an immediate danger versus anxiety. This little fish is about to get eaten for dinner, and so he is swimming as fast as he can, or he's going to be lunch for that shark. Now, there hasn't been a shark in those waters perhaps ever, or maybe once he saw a shark, and he swims around saying, what if that big bad fish comes today? What if that big bad fish comes today? And that's just the stress response turning on just from our thoughts. Mark Twain said, I've been through some terrible things in my life, some of which have actually happened. How many of you resonate with that? How many of you, we tend to spend so much time in what if this and what if that, right? And often those things never come to pass, and we've just exhausted ourselves and exhausted our system. So what a lot of people who have chronic anxiety say, it feels like this circle down here. It feels like they sweat a lot. They feel scared. And this was something done with kids. They feel a lot of muscle tension. They have trouble sleeping. Often they have chest pain and panic attacks. They tend to overthink everything. They have increased heart rate, and your mind and body refuse to relax no matter what you do. So that's chronic anxiety. It's worrying about everything all of the time. And just so you have the information, this is the differences between generalized anxiety versus panic attacks, etc. Generalized anxiety is persistent or excessive worry about routine activities. Panic attacks are an extreme form of fight-flight reaction. I mean, you're in fight or flight with generalized anxiety too, but it's not as extreme as when someone is in all-out panic attack. And then they literally are aware of the racing heart. They often feel like they're having a heart attack because of the pain in their chest, difficulty breathing, and intense fear. Agoraphobia is when you're fearful of a situation or a place. It might be snakes, it might be flying, it might be leaving the house. And we have a lot of problems with social anxiety, fear or self-consciousness about meeting new people. We see a lot of kids with social anxiety at Prairie Care for some reason. I think one of the reasons is because of the dependency on technology. Kids are so tuned into their technology, they're tuned out in terms of the world, and so many of their social needs are getting met through technology, which isn't really meeting their social needs. And then obsessive compulsive disorder is having unwanted thoughts and obsessions and compulsions that you have to do over and over and over again. Years ago, a 14-year-old was referred to me, and she was top of her class. She was already taking advanced placement classes. She had won some kind of a Midwest physics contest 3 years in a row, as well as advanced calculus. And I asked her when she came to see me for the first time how she thought I could help her and what she needed. And she said, I need to learn to multitask. And I said, tell me more about that. And she said, I haven't had a friend since kindergarten. And now that I'm a teen, I'd kind of like a friend. 'Cause other girls are talking about sleepovers and everything. And she said, and I don't know how to stay on top of my grades and have friends. She was also a hand wringer. That was her compulsion. She would literally wring her hands near constantly till the skin was off of them. Her hands were red and raw. So she had this salve she was always supposed to be putting on them. And she said, I want to go to outer space. And she said, if I don't get a handle on this and get more rounded, I'll never pass the tests and get in. Because you have to be psychologically healthy, and I'm a mess. Something's wrong with our education system if we just focus on the IQ. We now know that it's not IQ like it was in our generation that predicts success. It's emotional and social intelligence that's the better predictor of success. It's not IQ, but it used to be IQ. Everybody with me? How many of you ever heard a parent or a teacher say, I don't care what you feel, I just want to know what you think? Or stop being such a crybaby. We now know that our emotions have hormones and neuropeptides attached to either one of them, and strong emotions, certain strong emotions turn on the stress response system. So our emotions are really important, and it's not, some emotions we don't like so well, and they turn on the stress hormones, but it's not having the emotions that's the problem. It's not having healthy ways to express the emotions that's the problem. So I do a lot of classes in communication, which is really important because most people didn't grow up learning that. I love Peanuts. He says, my anxieties have anxieties. Should I be worried about being worried? And this just goes through sort of the difference between, everyday occasional anxiety versus an anxiety disorder. And since you have that in your handout, you can read that for yourself later. So I like to think of it like our brain is like a radio, and we're constantly tuning into different channels. And so it can be helpful to begin to ask yourself, am I tuning into the worry channel or into the calm channel? And that's really important because the worry messages that we turn into, the cortical centers then send messages that are alarming to the limbic system, the emotional brain, which activates that fight-flight response, activates an amygdala hijack. When we're getting signals from the cortex because of calm messages that everything is safe and calm, the lower brain responds and sends an all-clear message. Then we're able to activate the frontal cortex, and that's where memory is. That's where processing is. That's where we're able, again, to be collaborative, where we're able to be creative and problem solve. We can't do it from back here. Yes?
We could go back to, I can't read the comparison
Okay.
between the everyday and
Okay.
anxiety.
Oh, here.
Am I the only one?
Are you talking about this one?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Okay. So with everyday anxiety, we worry about paying the bills occasionally or landing a job if we're between jobs or, possibly the breakup of a romantic relationship or other events. Occasionally worry will come into our mind, but hopefully, we get better and better at not staying with that worry, not letting it go on. We might be embarrassed or self-conscious or uncomfortable or awkward occasionally in a social situation. We may have a case of nerves or sweating before a big test or presentation, or we may have some stage performance. Kids will often get anxious before a test. We may have a realistic fear of a dangerous object, place, or situation. The night that the helicopter was in front of my window, that was a realistic fear. So that was the external stressor. Had I continued to ruminate on it and kept myself awake for weeks wondering if the helicopter was going to come back, I'd have moved over into the anxiety disorder side of the page. And occasionally we have anxiety and sadness and difficulty sleeping, particularly after something really difficult has happened in our lives, or a traumatic event. Let's say a car accident, the loss of someone we love. Did you know that grief also turns on anxiety? Grief, we literally have a stress response from grief. It destabilizes us. So an anxiety disorder is much more constant, and it's unsubstantial worry that causes a significant distress and interferes with our daily life. It also makes us avoid social situations for fear of being judged. So when I used the word social anxiety earlier, that's what I was talking about. And we seemingly, out of the blue, might have a panic attack or a preoccupation with the fear of having another one, or people looking at us, etc. And we end up having irrational fears and avoidance, and we may have reoccurring nightmares and flashbacks or emotional numbing related to a traumatic event we were in. I worked with a woman once who was in a horrible car accident, and she actually walked away from it, and so did the 2 children she had with her in the back seat of the car. But she was driving down the freeway one day, and a truck was in front of her, and the back of the truck went flying open, and furniture started falling off the truck. And it's busy near rush hour traffic. She's trying to avoid the furniture, ended up rolling over 3 times in the ditch. And of course, you're trapped in the car. There's nothing you can do, so you're in freeze response. The little girls, her daughter and her daughter's best friend were in the back seat. They were fine. She could not sleep, she couldn't drive, and she obsessed constantly. That's pretty normal immediately after a traumatic event. And the way we look at it is if you have symptoms longer than 3 months, then it becomes post-traumatic stress. I worked with the kids who were on the bus for a year who were on the I-35W bridge collapse. They were coming back from a water slide park, and they all had acute anxiety, which they should, and acute trauma reaction. But because school was going to start in 3 weeks, I pulled together a team of volunteers that know this work well and the skills. We worked with them, and we were able to successfully get them to get back on the bus. We actually had a bus ritual and drove around town. And we had kids from all over town write them notes so that every child that got on the bus, there was a packet of cards that had been sent for them, welcoming, congratulating them for their courage in getting on the bus. Well, then we were asked by the mayor's office and one of the foundations in town if we'd continue to work with them. And so we worked with them for a year, and we did pre-research and post-research, and every one of them was trauma-free by the end of that year. And we worked with their parents, we worked with the staff at the community center that they were from, and it made a huge difference in their life. So we were literally able to prevent post-traumatic stress with early intervention and a community-wide intervention. All the kids were symptom-free fairly quickly, except for a couple of girls. Anybody have any idea why they wouldn't be? They were learning all the same tools. They were always there. They weren't skipping any sessions. Their mother was learning all the same tools. Their mom made a mistake. All the kids were taken to the ER, and Mom had this philosophy that if you fall off a horse, you get back on it. So she took them back to the bridge. I mean, it was just really not a smart thing to do. So these kids' nervous systems were kept on and revved up even longer than the rest of the kids. And then we found out that they were going home after school every day and watching the videos of the bridge falling down over and over and again. So they were re-traumatizing themselves. So when we talked with Mom and the girls, and they were willing to make a contract with us to not continue to do that, and they understood what they were doing to themselves, it stopped. All right, oops. So if I had you all hooked up to a PET scan, positron emission tomography, and And I had you all imagine that we were at the beach. And I had you imagine that you could hear the sound of the seagulls, feel the warm sun on the top of your head and your shoulders, feel that warm sand the bottom of your feet, and hear the lapping of the ocean waves, perhaps even feeling some of that warm water coming up to your ankles. Your optic cortex would light up, your auditory cortex would light up, your sensory cortex that would imagine the touch of the waves and the touch of the sand on the bottom of your feet would light up as though that's an actual event. The brain can't tell the difference between an imagined event and an actual event. And that's how they know worry is so bad for us. So if I put you all in a PET scan and you were imagining something you're really worried about, all these channels in your brain would light up as though you were experiencing that worry in live time. That's why worry has become an epidemic, which is contributing to people with chronic anxiety disorders. So those in flight response, first of all, before I go through this, I don't want you to read ahead of time. There's a caveat I want to say. We're talking now about stress having you. Stress is in charge when we go into fight flight. We're under full-on amygdala hijack, right? So we behave in particular ways because the survival brain is running the show. You with me? So it doesn't matter whether we're in fight or flight. In education, teachers like the kids who go into flight better because they're not as messy. They're not as disruptive. But in both cases, whether we have a child who's in flight, who is trying to get away from what stresses them and fly under the radar and trying to be invisible in the back of the room, or the kid who's antsy and in and out of his seat and disruptive, in both cases, stress has them. They're an amygdala hijack. Okay, you with me? Okay. So neither one is right or wrong. It's about the amygdala and the survival brain running the show when we're in fight or flight. So yes?
So in the amygdala, it's hijacked because of the hormones, stress hormones, 1400 and
right.
30. So in the exercises you're teaching us, because the hormones stay in your body for 10, 12 hours, do the exercises you teach us start to drop those hormones?
Yes, and that was, yeah, I think I talked about that, but maybe not enough. That's exactly what happened. So he's asking if, because normally the hormones stay in our body 12 hours or 10, 12 hours or more, he's saying with exercises, do the hormones begin to drop? Yes. Not only do they drop, but when we reactivate parasympathetic response, we start secreting feel-good hormones, which begin, and oxytocin and serotonin, and that begin to cancel out the harmful effects of the stress hormones. So yes. If they didn't drop, I wouldn't have gone back to sleep that night when the helicopter was in front of the bedroom. I would have been up all night. So they literally drop and begin to cancel out when we use specific exercises. Good question. Thank you for clarifying. So those in flight, their inner psychological need is around getting away to avoid feeling further overwhelmed. So they'll engage in a lot of distracting behaviors. If you have a kid, say a high schooler, there may be some who doesn't feel completely confident about a particular thing they're studying, they'll procrastinate. They'll often, if kids are stressed, they'll shut people out. This can be true of adults as well. There's an emotional distancing. Don't let me get too close because I'm just trying to regulate myself and calm myself down. With kids, there's a sense of you can't make me talk, which appears almost like defiance. And also, I found through my own son years ago, when kids say whatever, it's code. And it means I'll say whatever you want to get you off my back because I'm so stressed I can't talk anymore. And what do parents do? We see that through the lens of defiance, right? And being disrespectful. So we keep on. And then to the person in flight, that feels like we're bullying them because we keep pushing them and we push them and push them until they blow up. Everybody with me? And same's true in marriages. Happens with parent-child relationships, happens in marriages, sometimes it happens with best friends. Those in fight response, their inner psychological need, and remember this is the survival brain, the survival brain's need is to attempt to stay in control and feel in charge no matter what. And when they don't feel heard, they end up getting into power struggles. They have a need for resolution right now. So what I hear in marriage is, well, why can't we talk about it? Why do you always have to be running away? Why don't you talk when I want to talk? Because the partner who wants to get away from the stressor becomes a threat to the fighter. Because the fighter just wants to resolve it so they feel better. And so then that can escalate into lashing out verbally, et cetera, et cetera. And this is true no matter what age. And what we now know is we never resolve a problem from the same level it's created. So by continuing to have this kind of interaction, if you can see my hands, you know, this power struggling, when one's trying to get away and the other one's trying to push, nothing's going to get resolved in a healthy way, and it destroys relationships. The best thing to do is to take a break and have both parties do some self-regulation. Go do some deep breathing, get themselves back in balance. If you take a break and the whole time you're on break from each other, you're thinking about what you're going to say when you go back into the ring, it's going to be the same conversation. It doesn't work like that. You literally have to take a break. And that's much harder for the person who tends to go, their system is wired in such a way that they go into fight. Taking a break feels like a threat. So it's really important that they understand that you're going to come back. Well, how long? Well, how about we come back together in a couple hours? That helps if you don't just say, I just need a break. I can't talk about this now. It's better if you're interacting with someone who's a fighter to tell them when you will be able to talk about it. And it's also helpful if they know what's going on in their body. And that's true with children and teens as well as adults. The freezing response, and this is again such an incredible example of how marvelously we're made. The freezing response is biologically driven, and it's a reaction to freeze in the face of threat when we can't fight or flee. Remember I said when I sat on that bed for several moments, I almost froze. I didn't know. I'm listening to every creak and groan in this house that I'm renting. So I momentarily froze. The woman in the car whose car rolled over 3 times with the children in the back, she was in a complete freeze. There wasn't a thing she could do to get away from that. I have a good friend who was originally trained as a pharmacist, and earlier in her career she was robbed one night as she was closing up for all the opiate drugs. And it took her a long time to not startle when she heard the sound of certain rattling of keys. So that what it is it's an immobility response that's instinctual and unconscious and automatic when we can't fight or flee, when we can't escape. And with freezing, the immobilized body undergoes huge biochemical extremes in a very short time. And we're literally having hormones dumped in our system by both sympathetic and parasympathetic at the same time, which creates endogenous opiates, which are the brain's natural heroin-like substance, which creates a sense of numbing and psychological distance and freedom from pain. Isn't that amazing? And the result is those systems become overreactive and sensitized, leading to many emotional, behavioral, and cognitive issues later on if that person doesn't get help when there's been a major trauma. We've done a lot of work with the Center for Mind-Body Medicine with returning vets. And they're taught, they're trained to amp up sympathetic response. Their life depends on fighting, 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 being in hyperarousal, being on guard. They get out of the service or come home on leave, no one's told them how to turn that system off. So then we see a lot of the problems that we've heard about and that's been in the news. Yes.
With those chemicals causing that freezing, can that cause perhaps other symptoms, physical symptoms, like shaking or
Yes, absolutely. There's a whole sequelae of symptoms.
epileptic type of symptom?
Yes, it can cause a lot of shaking. In fact, an example of that, and there's a fellow who's done some wonderful work on trauma called Peter Levine, I think his name is. And the best thing to do when you're capable of it, let's say you've just had a near miss in a car accident. You're physically fine, but you really feel shook up and your body is shaking. It's better to just literally let yourself shake. I was leading a pilgrimage to France and Scotland about 15 years ago with a colleague, and I fell and broke both my arms and body surfed. So this part of my face is bloody and raw, and a bone is sticking out of this arm. It was a complex fracture. And we were out walking. We were in Chartres, and we were staying right close to the cathedral. And we were out walking to get some tea after we had taught that night. And when this happened, and a couple came along, and they drove us to the emergency room. And I'm allergic to all narcotics. And I can't speak any French. My friend can speak some, and she's trying to explain that I can't have any narcotics. And they put the French PDR in front of her, and she says, never mind, we'll do something else. And she knows these techniques. They immobilized my arm, and they kept me overnight because I had to have surgery there. The next day, I had no pain using these techniques. But when I first laid down on the cart, my entire body started to shake. And they thought I was going into shock and wanted to give me a shot. And my friend said, no, she'll be okay. She's just releasing the stress. And then I was fine. I wasn't stressed about any of it after that because I had literally let my body shake. My entire body was shaking. My legs were going like this. It looked like I was having a seizure, but I wasn't. But because we both know the physiology so well. Yes?
Can a person with that individual do something to comfort or control or relax?
Well, what she was instructing the ER doctor to just let me shake, and she in the meantime was saying, you're safe now, Lora. They're going to take care of you. And she was lowering her voice and talking to me in a very soothing tone of voice. Take some nice deep breaths with me. Come on, let's breathe a little deeper together. So that's what she was doing.
And that helps you.
Absolutely. So this is based on some research on cortisol. So cortisol fluctuates throughout the day. It's the gas in our car. We need a little cortisol to function. And think of those lines, the above and below one, as a normal range. So when we first wake up, our cortisol in the morning is a little low, then it begins to go up higher. Then mid-afternoon, when you feel like you need a coffee break, or you reach for chocolate or something, or you want to take a nap, that's because your cortisol is lower. And then late afternoon, it goes up again. The worst time to give a talk when people have the most trouble paying attention is mid-afternoon. So when our cortisol is within this resilient zone, we feel balanced and pretty focused and attentive and curious and resilient and emotionally stable and available to connect with others and appropriately responsive. This is what happens when there's been trauma. This is symptoms of undischarged trauma. So there's a traumatic event, and then we can have these fluctuations of being either in hyperarousal, which means overarousal, or hypoarousal, which means underarousal, for years or months. Everybody's system is different. So when we're in hyperarousal, let's see, we have hypoarousal. We have these symptoms. We're in underarousal. So we feel pretty depressed. That's because our adrenal glands get exhausted. We're not giving out as much cortisol. It's called adrenal exhaustion. We have a lot of lethargy. We feel emotionally deadened, pretty exhausted. We might have chronic fatigue as well as feel kind of disoriented. We have really low blood pressure, poor digestion, as well as some other complex symptoms. When we're in hyperarousal, up here, we have these symptoms: anxiety, panic, hyperreactivity, exaggerated startle response, inability to sit still or to relax, restlessness. this constant sense of hypervigilance, again, digestive problems, and we're very often emotionally flooded, and we react very quickly with lots of emotions, high emotions, and sometimes hostility and rage, because we're in that hypervigilant mode. So this is when there's chronic post-traumatic stress. Literally, people fluctuate between these two. So they may be on high arousal, and then the adrenal glands give out, and then we move into under-arousal. Guess what is the two most overdiagnosed mental health diagnoses there are? Bipolar disorder, yep. Bipolar disorder and ADHD. And if you go to the doctor with these symptoms, but you don't report that you went through a recent trauma or that you have a trauma history, guess what they're going to diagnose you as? Having an anxiety disorder. If you're in this stage of fluctuation, they're going to diagnose you with depression. So trauma is often underdiagnosed. And, you know, it's just in the last decade that we're really, really beginning to understand it. I mean, we started studying trauma during the Vietnam War and have continued to study it. But we found, even in recent times, that Vietnam veterans, as well as veterans in World War II, because so much is televised now, they never dealt with their trauma, and they may have been stuck in under-arousal for years. Suddenly they're seeing the TV, they're having flashbacks of their own history, and now they're moving into hyper-arousal because of the triggers. But we didn't know back in World War II or during Vietnam about what to do with traumatized vets. And we're beginning to understand better now. How we doing? Let's see. We're good. We're on till 8:30, right? Yeah. So what's the ABCs of resilience and prevention? First of all, awareness. It's really important that you understand what your specific symptoms of stress are, because they're different for everybody. Okay? So I want you to just start throwing one by one symptoms out, and I just want you to listen to the range. Headaches, okay? What else? Agitation, what else? Lack of appetite, what else? Over-appetite, What else? Inability to sleep, what else? Too much sleep, yep. Fatigue, what else? Drinking. That's how you cope, I would guess. Okay, but that's a symptom, yes. Okay, what else? I'm sorry, what'd you say? Yes, you clench your jaws, that's great, you're aware of it. What else? Easily annoyed, yes. Sweating, what else? Sensitivity to noise, You want to isolate, What else? Did we miss any? Nobody's mentioned muscle tension, like muscle tension up in your shoulders and your neck. Yeah, okay. The other one that people haven't mentioned, which is, believe it or not, it's a biggie, it's probably the most under-mentioned, is when we're really stressed, we have low back pain. And our buttocks tends to get, we get a tight butt. We also, remember the digestion system slows down? Our anus constricts. There's a reason why we call certain people tight-assed and anal retentive. Excuse me, I know I'm in church, but there is a physiological correlation to the condition. I'm sorry? I didn't know that. Thank you. Okay, well, I will rush then. So how many of you are I thought it was 8:30 I was supposed to be here. Okay, how many of you are okay with staying another 15, 20 minutes? Good? Okay, and if anyone feels like they need to get up and leave, I won't feel offended at all. So the first thing that's really important is you want to start noticing your symptoms. And the earlier you notice them, the more quickly you can do something about it. So for instance, one day, probably 5 years ago, I was driving down the road, and it was one of these winter days where it's really icy, back-to-back traffic that's backed up, and I'm in a hurry to get somewhere, so I'm going to be doing a presentation. And I noticed that my shoulders were aching, and then I realized that my hands hurt because I was gripping the steering wheel so tight. And then I kind of did a rewind, and I realized that my mind had been in what-if-ville. My mind was going, oh my gosh, what are they going to think? They're going to think I'm not coming, blah, 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 blah. So I caught that symptom. I loosened my hand on the steering wheel. I dropped my shoulders down. I started doing some deep breathing. I put some relaxation music on the radio, and I just calmed down. Worrying about getting there on time was not going to help me get there faster. There's no way I can hurdle myself over the line of traffic. But I was much more on top of my game when I got there because I recognized my symptoms. And I adjusted what I was doing. Had I continued, I probably would have ended up in a headache. And I know at least one person mentioned headaches, and my guess is there's more headaches that people get in this room. It's because we don't notice the earlier symptoms. We've been overriding our symptoms all day rather than take some time. You know, often I have nurses who say, well, it's great if I could step aside and go do some deep breathing, but I don't have enough time in my day. I say, how many times a day do you wash your hands? Lots. Well, what would it be like if every time you washed your hands, you took that as a stress break and you just really washed your hands and focused on what you were doing and did some deep breathing at the same time? We've all got to get much better at finding ways to integrate right into our day in and day out small stress busters. About 5 years ago, I figured out one morning when I got out of the shower, I couldn't remember if I washed my hair. So I did a rewind, and I thought, well, I'm sure I washed my hair, but why don't I remember? And then I realized it was my habit to put my body in the shower, and my mind would think about all the things it had to do the day. It took me probably 3 or 4 weeks to retrain my mind to stay in the shower, as ridiculous as that sounds. How many of you do that? You get in the shower and your mind takes a hike. Where literally your day, if you start staying fully in the shower, but it's like building a new muscle. It's like learning a new relaxation exercise or a new physical exercise. Before you develop the muscle memory, you have to do it pretty repeatedly. So awareness is the first thing. You need to really start looking at where your life is out of balance. Where do you not give yourself enough space? And then it's really important to connect with other people and to talk about your anxiety. And to have good friends who say, when was the last time you went and had a pedicure or got a massage? Or how about if we take a walk around the lake this weekend? Or whatever it is that helps you to relax in some normal ways. And you want to begin to build more of that into your daily life. So mindfulness is the human capacity to be focused, self-aware, tuned into yourself and to others and the world around you. And you do that without judgment. So whenever you're learning a new skill, if we then say, I'm never going to get this right, I'm just no good at this, and we give up, that's what's going to happen. So we have to let go of the judgment. What did Christ say? To love our neighbor as we love ourselves? But somehow we tend to leave ourselves out, right? Mindlessness, and we have become a culture of mindless people where we do everything automatic and habitually, and we don't even think about it. And it's most common when people are always in a hurry and always multitasking and distracted and overloaded, and we treat information as though it's context-free. We don't even have time to think about things. And we tend to treat the applications of yesterday's solutions to today's problems, and that doesn't work, and we tend to be disconnected from our head and heart. That leads to more anxiety as well, because we were born actually with all circuits connected. And we have to begin to have self-compassion, and studies show that self-compassion becomes a buffer for stress, and it increases resilience and self-worth. And those people who really practice self-compassion, they are far less likely to end up with an anxiety disorder. And one of the most important questions you need to ask yourself is, what keeps me from being compassionate to myself? And you don't have to answer that here. That's one of those things that you go home and journal about or think of as you're going to think about when you're going to sleep. You know, what's the biggest barrier or story you tell yourself related to your own self-compassion, to your self-judgment, to always having a critic who's going, nah, 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 nah. Self-compassion involves both being and doing. It's being with ourselves, our thoughts and our emotions with empathy and understanding and caring and support. And it operates best when we're accepting whatever exists in the present moment. It's about intention and attitude. It's also about what we do. It's about how we talk to ourselves and how we treat ourselves. Are we willing to bring flowers home for ourselves? Are we willing to be with ourselves as though we're our own best friend and treat ourselves kindly? Do we ever buy small gifts for ourselves or treat ourselves in some way, as well as we might treat a spouse or someone else we love? And self-compassion is asking for help and putting ourselves in the center of our own heart. So those are some of the things that obviate stress and anxiety. So I'm going to wind down. How would you like to end tonight with one breathing exercise? So you get it. Okay. So let me just jump ahead. So breath is the meeting place of mind, body, and spirit. It connects us to consciousness, to ourself, to our own inner life, and it connects us to life itself. It's the foundation of mind-body awareness. And our breath is what signals to the vagus nerve the message that's going to get sent to the amygdala. And it's something you can do anywhere, anytime. Okay, so just uncross everything and sit up straight. And I'd like to invite you to close your eyes. And if you're comfortable, I'd like you to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, just because it's a much more efficient way to activate the relaxation response. But if that feels just too abnormal, just breathe in whatever way feels easy and natural. But I want you to breathe all the way down to the bottom of your diaphragm. The bottom of your rib cage. And as you breathe in, say the word inside your own mind, soft or softening. And on the exhalation, the words letting go. So as you're breathing in all the way down to the bottom of your diaphragm, your entire diaphragm should be rising and falling. And you don't have to coordinate that. That'll just do it on its own as you breathe deeply. And then see if you can make the exhalation just a little longer than the inhalation. So we're breathing in and softening all the muscles in our face and our shoulders. And we're exhaling stale carbon dioxide and any thoughts, and just bringing ourselves into the present moment. And with each in-breath, we're breathing in fresh oxygen, comes as a gift from the trees and from Mother Nature. And we're exhaling, again, anything that we don't need right now. And we're just going to do this for just a few moments so you get a good, strong sense of it. It's a wonderful way to help yourself get to sleep at night. And just notice if there's any places tight or tense in your body, and see if you can focus your attention and bring some relaxation to that area. Perhaps your shoulders or your lower back, perhaps the muscles in your forehead. Wherever you feel any tightness, just focus your attention as you keep breathing deeply and letting go to the next moment. And sometimes when we do this, we begin to recognize just how tired we are. And if we never stop during the day, Sometimes this even puts people to sleep because it signals to the body it's time to just let go. So just take another couple deep cleansing breaths. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes and bring your focus back to the room. Okay. How are you feeling? All right. So I'm so sorry I went over. I really thought we had till 8:30. But you've been a wonderful group, and I appreciate you so much, and I'm here for a couple minutes if you have any questions.
We have a few announcements to make. Thank you so much. That was so lovely. I
Thank
was
you.
very restful in the back.
Oh, good.
You did a good job.
Good.
Really
And I'm
appreciate
so
it.
sorry I went over. I really thought
You
it was...
know, we
later.
didn't mind, did we?
Oh, good.
Did anybody mind?
Good.
No,
Well, then
we
I'll
didn't
let go
mind
of
at
it and I
all.
won't beat myself up.
No,
I'll practice
absolutely
what I
not.
teach. Good.
No, it was
Thank
lovely.
you.
I just want to say thank you to Prairie Care, to Marilyn and Raven. They're out there and they've got more brochures and information if you'd like to,
And something I
gather
want
some
you to
more
know
resources.
is Prairie Care does a lot of reaching out to the community and a lot of supporting the community and does free needs assessments. So
Right. Yeah, there's
that's just
a
something I
phone
want
number
to
that
know
you
if
can
know
call.
someone who's really struggling.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. We have, again, more resources out on the table. I want to say thank you to Jenny and Michelle, who without them, you wouldn't be able to be here tonight. So thanks to you guys. And I know they have a few words as well, so bless each one of you. Oh, and I'm Pastor Karen from Lord of Life, so welcome. I'm glad to see any visitors and some familiar faces as well.
Thank you. So there are cookies and coffee still out there. Feel free to partake in that. There is a sign-up sheet, basically, if you want to get on the email list to find out about future speakers from Refresh at Lord of Life, which is basically just a resource for life struggles. And we partner with things like Prairie Care, so the community partners and the experts, just to bring, information, educational opportunities, and that sort of thing. Prairie Care has certificates for people who need it for a certificate of attendance for jobs. Some teachers need those, social workers. So if you need one of those, Prairie Care has those.